Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode in the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour special series on the REINS Act, the REINS Act in Focus. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Joining us right now is Jeremiah Mosteller. He is a policy director with Americans for Prosperity. AFP is an organization I've done a lot of work with over the years. Jeremiah, your perspective, why is the REINS Act important, and why, more importantly, is it so important right now to get passed and implemented?
Andrew, well, thank you so much for having me on the lunch hour. Very honored to join you today and to talk about the REINS Act, a vitally important piece of legislation. It's so important right now because of the ongoing conversations around government efficiency happening at the federal level. And the reality is that President Trump can do all this good work alongside DOJ to reduce the size, scope, and cost of agencies, but it's only temporary. It can end on the next day of the next administration if Congress does not act. And one of the key ways that Congress can act to prevent us from re-engaging in bloat in these agencies and continuing to shrink them going forward is the REINS Act. At the end of the day, regulations are the products of these agencies. And the more regulations they have, the more staff that they need, and the more they step outside the bounds that Congress has set for them.
What I appreciated about the work that AFP does is that you're a nonpartisan organization. And so let's flip it around. I know you guys are deeply concerned about executive branch authority and executive branch power, regardless of who's in the White House. Let's talk about why this is important to folks who may not be supporters of Donald Trump, who may be Democrats or never Trumpers or what have you. Why should they be interested in the passage and implementation of the REINS Act?
Yeah. Well, Andrew, it comes basically down to separation of powers. And it seems that everyone cares about separation of powers whenever their folks are not in the White House. And so regardless of whether you're in power or you're not in power, you should care about separation of powers in the way that our founders outlined it in the Constitution. And the REINS Act is a clear way to do that. It allows us to continue to have what Democrats want, is agency expertise and to leverage the scientists at the agencies to help craft the regulations. But it also ensures a check on that regulatory overreach through Congress. And so regardless of whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in office, members of Congress should want to be able to ensure that agencies are passing regulations that align with the statutes they pass and with the intent of the statutes that they pass.
Right. And that's exactly it. Especially in an era in which last year we had the Chevron doctrine overturned by Loper Bright and Relentless, now should be the opportunity. And far too many of what I find astounding, Jeremiah, and I'm sure you do as well, are the folks in Congress who apparently want to push more power into the executive branch, which is just it's crazy. These members of Congress should do their job, shouldn't they?
They should, Andrew, but it seems that they are unwilling to take the hard votes, regardless of party, regardless of tenure. They seem to not want to do the job. And so what we've seen is decades and decades of them passing vague, ambiguous pieces of legislation and then saying, hey, agencies, figure it out. And then we get terrible things like where the EPA says that a puddle is considered a water of the United States, right, and that you can't actually do anything to remediate the problem.
My favorite, as I've talked about, is at one point during one of the recent administrations, the Clean Water Act says you cannot regulate traditional farming activity like disking. They have a thing that goes behind a combine. It disks up a farm field and it creates those nice furrows. And someone said, it's really interesting. The Clean Water Act can regulate runoff from mountain ranges. Let's call farm furrows mini mountain ranges. This would have huge sweeping implications. Now, obviously, thankfully, cooler heads said, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe this is a dumb idea. But we've seen far too many instances in which dumb ideas, they're implemented. They go through and they go out there. This is Congress's role to step in and say, something, a farm furrow is a farm furrow. It is not a mini mountain range. This is what the REINS Act is all about, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And Andrew, we saw some of the worst cases of Washington trying to micromanage our lives during the Biden administration, whether it's the type of appliances you could have in your house, the way you do your job, whether you repay debts that you owe to other parties. Like the Biden administration just tried to take all of these regulations and really kind of push them beyond what we've ever seen before, and then really control Americans' daily lives. And I think most American people, regardless of party, regardless of philosophical orientation, think that Washington should stay out of their daily lives.
So, it's interesting because AFP is at its heart a grassroots organization. What are you guys hearing from folks out in everyday America about regulatory costs and the REINS Act? Talk about this.
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, I always tell people, hey, look, I help lead a policy team of 30 people. We're smart folks, but the reality is our superpower at AFP are our millions of grassroots activists across the country. And many of those are small business owners, whether they're plumbers, owners of your local brewery, other types of restaurants, other types of business owners. And so we hear from them all the time about how either federal government inefficiency or federal government overregulation constantly gets in the way of them being able to do what they want to do to provide jobs in their community. Yeah. And we hear from them over and over again how a new regulation is put in place and they have to make the choice. Am I going to continue to operate, or am I going to hire those 2 additional roles that I wanted to hire? They really need those 2 additional jobs and those 2 additional staff, but they can't now because they're having to meet that compliance burden.
It's interesting to talk about this because this is the issue of opportunity cost. And, my calculations based upon the work of a number of different economists show that for every dollar in direct regulatory costs, there's a $19 multiplier in lost opportunity cost. I mean, talk about this. Talk about the issue of productive time, right? If you're spending an hour doing paperwork for the EPA, that's an hour you're not spending on your business. Talk a little bit more about this.
That's right. I mean, it is really crazy. You can dig in. There are a number of statistics. Andrew, you've done great work that we cite as well.
Thank you.
We've also seen some other statistics come out that shows that it costs households an average of $16,000 to $23,000 each year for the federal regulatory burden.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen some examples where kind of this grassroots swell has resulted in Congress or others taking action to pull it back. I mean, we saw it with the Corporate Transparency Act, which would have added massive paperwork burdens on even small businesses.
Right.
And the Trump administration and members of Congress stepped up and said, we're not doing that. There was a legitimate, potentially good faith reason to actually pass that legislation, but they weighed the cost and benefits as implementation got closer and decided, hey, we're not going to move forward with this because of the negative impact it would have.
So you're talking to folks up on the Hill. You're talking to folks on both sides of the aisle. I'm sure. Where are you thinking this is going to go? I mean, was pulled out of the House version. Yeah, and then I'm sorry. It's all a blur now. Rumor is we may get it. We may get a Senate version for the first time ever. Talk a little bit about the differences between the two and where you think things are going to go.
Yeah. So, Andrew, what essentially happened was we had what would be a slimmed down version of it originally in the House proposal that would have only impacted regulations and required congressional approval of regulations that involved some spending. So it was a way to try to move it into the reconciliation package. Ultimately, there were some major concerns about whether that would pass the bird bath. So what happened was there was some money added for OMB and GAO to allow them to do some regulatory oversight and increase the ability to slow some of these things down, do some more cost-benefit analysis. That was also ultimately pulled out. And so the House proposal now is lacking that, but we're in the Senate conversation right now. Your listeners have probably heard the parliamentarian going across all of the different proposals, and she's pulling some out. She's saying some can continue. Our hope is that they'll be able to reintroduce what was in the House version originally, which did tie to spending, which did have a clear connection to federal spending, put it back in the Senate package, get the parliamentarian to approve it, and move forward. And we even had all of our state directors from all 50 chapters across the country, as well as other staff here doing a lobby day. So we wanted them to hear from the activists about how this is important for them to add this proposal back to the Senate proposal for reconciliation.
Tell you what, how do folks get involved if they want to become a grassroots activist on the REINS Act? How do they get a hold of you? How do they get a hold of AFP? How do they get involved?
Yeah, we would love to have all of your listeners involved with us. They can go to americansforprosperity.org, and we would love to connect them to our local chapters across the country.
Well, there you go. Jeremiah Mosteller, he's a policy director with AFP. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew. It was an honor. Looking forward to talking with you again soon.
Always. We'll get you back. Well, this has been yet another episode in our special series from the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour, REINS Act in Focus. I'm Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.